Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today? I know yesterday, you guys probably weren't here because, well, we don't usually do it on Wednesdays. But today we are going to be doing the Bible. We aren't going to be doing the synopsis with Kim.
Why not? Yeah, we should.
Today. So.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Oh, actually we are. She changed her mind. Then we are going to be doing Dragon Drums Chapter 9. And I hope you guys enjoy the video. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss another video. Dad, you ready? Yeet. I just chucked myself out of there.
Hi. Oh, wow, it's bright here.
It looks great.
Yeah, the picture looks good. It's just a little bright. Okay, so we are going to continue with Psalm chapter 19, but I was looking at the introduction to the psalm. I don't know exactly what that's called. The little synopsis that tells what it's about. And it says that it was to the choir master, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who addressed the words of this song to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And I was looking, and I'm not exactly sure. It's obviously, because it mentions Saul, it's obviously somewhere in 1 Samuel where this probably happened. Lots of pursuing of David in the second half of 1 Samuel. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but if you have a particular passage where you think that this psalm might fit, then please go ahead and put that in the comments below, and we'll maybe make some commentary on whether or not, oh yeah, that's probably right. Anyway, so this is Psalm chapter 18. I already read the little introduction, little blurb there, and that is, by the way, in the original text. So, there you go. All right, he said, I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. Where is JJ going?
He went to get his markers.
Oh, okay.
We can hear you.
Sorry, he's wondering. I'm going to start over. All right.
Yippee.
Psalm chapter 18. Hello, three people. Kimberly, Mom, Granny Bear. Nice to see you.
This is your face.
Okay, so this is Psalm chapter 18. I'm going to start over. I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. The cords of death encompassed me, the torrents of destruction assailed me, the cords of Sheol entangled me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called upon the Lord, to my God I cried for help. From his temple he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked, the foundations also of the mountains trembled and quaked because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and devouring fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He came swiftly on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him. Thick clouds dark with water out of the brightness before him. Hailstones and coals of fire broke through his clouds. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice. Hailstones and coals of fire. And he sent out his arrows and scattered them. He flashed forth lightnings and routed them. Then the channels of the sea were seen, and the foundation of the world were laid bare. The foundations of the world were laid bare. At your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. He sent forth on high, he took me. He drew me out of many waters. He rescued me from my strong enemy and from those who hated me, for they were too mighty for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. The Lord dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands he rewarded me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord, and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his rules were before me, and his statutes I did not put away from me. I was blameless before him, and I kept myself from my guilt. So the Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his sight. With the merciful you will show yourself merciful. With the blameless man you will show yourself blameless. With the purified you show yourself pure, and with the crooked you make yourself seem tortuous. For you save a humble people, but the haughty eyes you bring down. For it is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lightens my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all those who take refuge in him. For who is God but the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? The God who equipped me with strength and made my way blameless. He made my feet like the feet of a deer and set me secure on the heights. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend Golly, I should know this one. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have given me the shield of your salvation, and your right hand supported me, and your gentleness made me great. You gave a wide place for my steps under me, and my feet did not slip. I pursued my enemies and overtook them, and did not turn back till they were consumed. I thrust them through so that they were not able to rise. They fell under my feet. For you equipped me with strength for the battle. You made those who rise against me sink under me. You made my enemies turn their backs to me, and those who hated me I destroyed. They cried for help, but there was none to save. They cried to the Lord, but he did not answer them. I beat them fine as dust before the wind. I cast them out like the mire of the streets. You delivered me from strife with the people. You made me the head of many nations. People whom I had not known served me. As soon as they heard of me, they obeyed me. Foreigners came cringing to me. Foreigners lost heart and came trembling out of their fortresses. The Lord lives, and blessed be my rock, and exalted be the God of my salvation, the God who gave me vengeance and subdued peoples under me, who rescued me from my enemies. Yes, you exalted me above those who rose against me. You delivered me from the man of violence. For this I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations, and sing to your name. Great salvation he brings to his king, and shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his offspring forever. That is the end of Psalm chapter 18, and that is a very powerful psalm, and I hope you're enjoying the reading of God's word. And with that, we have Kimberly here ready to give us the synopsis. Here she is.
Show off your new duds.
I'm so tired. If you can't tell, I might be speaking a bit weird because I got aligners. Yay! And they hurt a lot. But
Mostly putting them in and taking them out.
Yeah, and it's really hard to speak because I can't say things and it's really hard.
You'll get used to it.
Yeah, Mom says I'll get used to it. But, let's see. In the last chapter, Primer, he found a place where he can live, kind of. So he learned how to fish by some advice that Menely gave him about fishing, and he made a fishing pole out of vines and some thorns, and then he used fruit for bait. And then what happened was Thread fell while he was out fishing for his fire lizard queen egg, because he didn't know when it would hatch, so he wanted to be prepared. And I'm really sorry that I am talking so weird.
It's fine.
So he goes over and literally he manages to stay underwater for most of from a little bit of the thread fall, and then he manages to get under this ledge. And it's literally like, it said that it was less than an inch away from his nose. So it was pretty close. So he managed to catch like 2 fish for his egg that actually did hatch right after Thread. He dug it up to make sure it was okay. And then, and he found that it was starting, like he was running over toward the egg to see if it was okay, and he saw movement. And he's like, oh my gosh, my egg's about to be eaten by a snake. So he goes over there and he sees that his fire lizard hatched, and it is a queen egg. And so he chopped up the fish and fed it to the ravaging monster fire lizard, because it was so hungry.
It was screaming.
And then there were these birds that came down and tried to eat them. So he ran over to the forest where and the birds, they flew away because some fire lizards and dragons were coming over, and he doesn't want to be seen by them, at least not yet. And I have a hunch that it's actually Menely's fire lizards and some of the Hold's dragons. So that's what I think it is. And I'm gonna give it to Mom to find out what it is for real.
Hi, everybody. I got something stuck in my eye earlier today, and now my allergies are like, so I look like I'm crying. My nose is running. So we're going to read chapter 9, and it's 7 pages, and because we started kind of late, and because my allergies and everything, and because we kind of don't, we're not in a hurry to finish, that might be all that we do tonight. If you want me to keep going, you better be very, very convincing. All right, chapter 9. Afterwards, Pimer wasn't certain why he had run from the Dragon Riders. He seemed to have been running from or to something ever since his voice had changed. In his panic, he supposed he aligned the old-timers Dragon Riders with Lord Merrin, and he did not want to encounter anyone connected with Lord Merrin just then. Whatever, that night he plunged through the jungle until lack of breath and painful stitch in his side, and the darkness forced him to halt. Sinking to the ground, he rearranged his fire lizard comfortably and then fell asleep. Just as the sun was rising the next morning, she awoke him, snappy with hunger. He eased the worst of her pangs with his own with fresh red fruit, cool from the night air and succulently sweet. Then he turned north and make his way back to the beaches to fish for Farley, for that was the name he gave his little queen. Pushing his way through the underbrush, he tripped over a half-eaten runner beast carcass. Farley chattered with delight and ate flesh from bone, humming at him in pleasure. "You'll choke like that," he said, and proceeded to hack smaller pieces, keeping about 1 knife slice ahead of her voracious appetite. When Farley had curled herself about Pimer's neck, thoroughly sated, her belly bulging, he sliced more meat from the dead runner. He figured the creature must have been killed during Threadfall, so the meat wouldn't as yet be tainted. Not only would it be a welcome change for him from fish, but red meat was better for Farley as well. Comforted by her sleeping weight about his neck, Pimer found thick grasses and wove a rough envelope in which to carry the meat. He estimated that he had enough for several meals for himself and Farley, but if he could cook it, the meat wouldn't spoil as quickly in the heat. Continuing on the northwestern course back to the beach, he collected dry grass and sticks with which to build a fire. He was still heading generally north when he saw the unmistakable glint of water through the thinning trees to the left. He stopped, stared, unable to think how he could have mistaken his direction. A lake? However, if water was this close now, he pushed his way through the thinning screen of trees and brush and came out on a small rise. Below him were wide tidelands which swept from the forest in an undulating grassy plain broken by thick clumps of a gray-green bush. The plain continued on the other side of the broad river, which gradually widened until, in a distant point, now hazy with heat, it must open its mouth into the sea. A breeze, scented with an oddly familiar pungent odor, dried the sweat on his face. Squinting against the sunlight, Pimer could see herd beasts grazing on the lush grass on both sides of the river. And yet there had been Thread here the day before, and no dragon riders flaming to prevent the deadly stuff burrowing into the ground and eating the land baron. As if to reassure himself, he poked at the soil with one of the sticks he'd collected. Lifting up a clod of grasses, grubs fell from the roots, and Pimer was suitably awed by the abilities of those little gray wrigglies, which could, all by themselves, keep such an enormous plain free from the ravages of Thread. And those bloody old-timers hadn't so much as stirred from the weir during yesterday's fall. They weren't proper dragon riders at all. Falar and Lessa had been right to exile them here to the south, where the insignificant grubs did their work for them. Why, he could have been killed during that Threadfall, and not a dragon rider around to protect him. Not, Pimer honestly admitted, that he hadn't been well able to protect himself. He gazed across the river, now noticing the swifter moving current that rippled towards the sea. He'd have fresh water for drinking here, as well as a retreat from Thread. The jungle behind him would provide fruit and tubers, and the meadow's inhabitants red meat for Farley. There was no need to trek to the sea again. He could stay here until Farley had lost the worst of her hatchling appetite. Then he'd better start back to the southern hold. If he was careful, he could avoid being noticed by the old-timers until he'd made contact with the holder. What was his name? He was certain he'd heard Sibyl mention the man by name. Toric. Yes, that was it, Toric. He set about making a rough circle of stones to protect his fire from the breeze, whistling softly. A fresh breeze brought him another whiff of that odor, sun-warmed and so puzzlingly familiar. Whatever it was must be down on the plain from the wind came from that direction. Leaving his meat to roast at his fire, Pimer made his way down the slope, looking about the tiny blooms in among the grasses with thread-prickled blades. He almost passed the first clump of bushes before he realized that their leaves were definitely familiar. Familiar, he thought, as he reached out to touch one, but so much larger. He bruised the leaves as the final test, and sure enough had to jerk his hand back as his fingers smarted and then lost all feeling. Numbweed. The whole plain was dotted with numbweed bushes, growing bigger and fuller than any he'd ever seen in the north. Why, it was harvested even on one side of this plain. You'd keep every weir on Pern in numbweed for the entire pass. Master Aldive ought to know about this place. A petulant squeak in his ear warned him that Farley had roused, probably smelling the roasted meat. He carefully broke off some large numbweed leaves, and wrapping their cut stems in a thick blade of grass, returned to the fire. When he had given Farley a few half-done pieces of meat, she was quite content to curl up for the rest of her nap. Then Pimer bruised a numbweed leaf between two flat, clean stones. He rubbed the wet side of the stones against his cuts, shivering at the slight sting of the raw numbweed before its anesthetic properties took effect. He was careful not to rub the stone too deep, for raw numbweed must be used sparingly or you could get horrible blisters and end up with scars. As he settled by the fire to wait for his meat to cook, he knew he'd be sorry to leave here. He said that to himself the next morning when he rose, and that evening when he curled up in the shelter he'd made for Farley and himself. He really ought to try to get word back to the Harper Hall. Each day, however, found him too busy catering to the needs of a rapidly growing fire lizard to make provisions for a journey of possibly several days. He spent a whole day trying to catch a fish for the oils needed to soothe Farley's flaking skin. Then thread fell again. This time he was adequately prepared and forewarned. Farley went hysterical with alarm, her eyes wheeling furiously with the red of anger as she rose on her wings and, shrieking defiance to the northeast, suddenly flicked out. When Pimer called her, she popped back in, scolded him furiously, and then disappeared. She had gone between before, inadvertently scared by some odd noise or other, so that it wasn't until she remained away for much longer than before that Pimer began to wonder what had frightened her. He looked northeast, noticing as his eyes swept across the plains that the animals were all moving towards the river with considerable haste. The quick blossom of flame against the sky caught his eyes, and he saw not only Thread's gray rain, but the distant motes of dragons. He had made preparations against the next fall of Thread, determined never to spend another entire eternity under a rock ledge. He had found a sunken tree trunk where the river flowed out of the forest. Diving into the water, he kicked down to the depth at which drowning Thread could no longer sting. There he hooked his arm around the tree trunk and poked back to the surface a thick reed, through which he was able to breathe. That's ingenious. It was not the most comfortable of hideaways. What?
What if Thread goes through it?
Meh. It was not the most comfortable of hideaways, and Fish constantly mistook his arms and legs for outsized Thread, so he had to keep moving. Time, too, seemed motionless, and it felt like hours had passed before the impact circles of Thread on the water's surface ceased. He was glad when, with a mighty kick of his legs, he burst back into the air, nearly overturning a small runner. In fact, the shallows seemed to be blanketed with animals. As if his eruption from the depths had been a signal, or perhaps his presence had frightened them, the creatures began to struggle towards the shore, shake themselves, and then rapidly take off down the plain. Some were bawling with pain, and he saw a number with bloody face scores where Thread had stung them. He also noticed some of the injured making to the numbweed bushes and rubbing against the leaves. Pimer waded to the bank, calling for Farley as he sank to the solid ground. His arms and legs felt leaden from his efforts to discourage Fish from eating him. Farley burst into view just above him, chittering with relief and anxiety. She landed on his shoulder, wrapping her tail about his neck and stroking his cheek with her head. One paw wrapped around his ear, the other anchored to his nose. They comforted each other for a long moment, then Pimer felt Farley's body go taut. She peered around his face and began to chatter angrily. Twisting about, at first, Pimer saw nothing to alarm him. Farley loosed her hold on his nose, and then he realized that she was pointing skyward. He saw the Wearies then, circling high, and knew that something had not survived the fall. If Wearies were after it, it was something that would also feed him and his fire lizard. Farley seemed as eager as he to beat the Wearies to their victim, and she chattered encouragement as he found a stout stick and made his way up the river bank. Most of the creatures that had taken refuge in the river had disappeared, but he kept a wary eye for snakes and large crawlers that might also have found sanctuary in the river. He saw the bulge of the fallen runner beast half hidden under a large numbweed bush. To his surprise, it heaved upwards, its bloodied flank crawling with grubs. The poor thing couldn't still be alive. He raised his stick to put an end to the creature's pain when he realized that the movement came from under the animal, spasmodic and desperate. Farley hopped from his shoulder and chittered, touching a tiny protruding hoof that Pimer hadn't noticed. It had been a female runner beast. With an exclamation, Pimer grabbed the hind legs and pulled the corpse from the youngster. The female had given her life to protect from Thread. Bleeding, it staggered to its feet, shedding a carpet of grubs, and hobbled the few steps to Pimer, its head and shoulders scored here and there by Thread. Almost absently, Pimer stroked the furry head and scratched behind the ear cup, feeling its rough tongue licking his skin. Then he saw the long, shallow scrape on the little beast's right leg. "So that's why you didn't make it to the river, huh, you poor stupid thing," said Pimer, gathering it closer to him. "And your dame sheltered you with her body. Brave thing to do." It bleated again, looking anxiously up at him. Farley chirped and stroked her body against the uninjured leg before she moved on to start making a meal off the dead runner. With a sense of propriety, Pimer took the youngster off to the river to bathe its wound, treat it with numbweed, and wrap it with a broad river plant to keep off insects. He tethered it with his fishing line and then went back to slice off enough meat for several meals. The wearies were closing in. Farley was sated enough not to resist leaving the carcass, nor did she object when Pimer carried Little Stupid back to their forest shelter. Little named this animal Stupid. As Pimer settled down to sleep that night, he had Stupid curled tightly against him along his back and Farley draped across his shoulders. She had fully intended to use the interval between this fall and the next to make his way to the southern hold, but he really couldn't leave Stupid, crippled or as well as motherless. The leg would heal with care and rest. Once Stupid was walking easily after the next threadfall, he would definitely make tracks to southern. Despite the lateness of the hour, the Master Harper could see light coming from his study window as he wearily made his way from the meadow where Leoth and Naton had just left him. He was very tired, but well satisfied with the results of his efforts over the last 4 days. Zare, balancing on his shoulder, cheeped an affirmative. Robinson smiled to himself and rubbed the little bronze's neck. "And Sibyl and Meneley are going to be satisfied too, unless, of course, there has been word from that scamp that they haven't been able to send me." He saw the half of the great hall door swing into darkness and wagered with himself who waited for him there in the dark. Master? He was right. It was Meneley. "You were away so long, Master," she cried in a soft voice as she closed the door behind him and spun the wheel to lock the bolts tightly in floor and ceiling. "Ah, but I've accomplished much. Any news from Pimer?" "No," and her shoulders drooped noticeably. "We would have sent you word instantly." He put his arm around her slender shoulders comfortingly. "Is Sibyl awake as well?" "Yes, indeed," she gave a chuckle. "Naton sent Tris to warn us, or we'd have been locked out of your own, or you'd have been locked out of your own hall. Not for long, my dear girl, not for long." They were climbing the steps now, and he noticed that she slowed her pace to match his. He was tired, true, but worse. He no longer commanded the resilience that made no bother of late hours. "Lord Groe was back 2 days ago, Master. Why did you have to stay so long in Nabol?" He felt her shoulders give a convulsive shudder under his arm. "I wouldn't have stayed at that place a moment longer than I had to. Not the most of congenial of holds, to be sure. I can't think what can have happened to all the wine Lord Foe appropriated in his conquests. He had some good pressings, too. Marin can't have drunk it all in a bare 13 or 14 turns." "You'd no Bendon wine, then?" Meneley teased him. "None, you unfeeling wretch." "Then I'm more amazed than ever that you stayed so long." "I had to," he replied, amazed at the irritation in his voice. But they had reached his rooms now, and he opened the door, grateful for the sight of the familiar disorder of his workroom and the welcoming smile on Sibyl's face. The journeyman was on his feet, helping his master out of his flying gear and guiding him to a chair, while Meneley poured a goblet of decent Bendon wine. "Now, sir, have you a tale to tell?" asked Sibyl, lightly taunting with his master's usual greeting. "Could we not have come to Nabol and helped speed matters?" "I would have thought you'd seen enough of Nabol Hold to last a turn or two," said Master Robinson, sipping at his wine. "He's got news, Sibyl," said Meneley, narrowing her eyes to glare at his master. "I can tell that look on his face. Smug. That's what he is. Did you learn what happened to Pimer and Nabol?" "No, I'm afraid I didn't find out about Pimer, but among other equally important things, I have arranged matters so that we don't have to worry about Nabol Hold supplying the old-timers with northern goods or receiving a further embarrassing riches of fire lizard eggs in that otherwise impoverished hold." "Then none of the disappointed heirs caused trouble during the confirmation?" asked Sibyl. Master Robinson waggled his fingers, a sly smile on his face, not to speak of, though Hittet is a master of the snide remark. "They could scarcely contend the nomination, since it had been made before such notable witnesses. Besides, I never bothered to disabuse them of the notion that Bendon and the other lord holders would call the heir to account for the sins of his predecessor. Master Robinson beamed at the reactions of his journeyman to his strategy. It afforded me considerable pleasure to help the new Lord Dector send the worthless lot back to improve their beggared holds. And Lord Dector? Asked Siebel. A good choice, however unwilling. I pointed out to him adroitly that if he merely regarded his hold as a flagging business and applied the same ingenuity and industry with which he had built a flourishing carding trade, he would find that the hold would respond and repair. I also pointed out that in his 4 sons he has able assistants and ministers, a fortune few lords can enjoy. However, he did have one matter he was particularly anxious to resolve. The harper paused. He looked at the expectant faces. A matter that just happens to march kindly with a problem we face. He turned to Meneley. You'd best ready that boat of yours. He had started referring to her skiff in that manner after he and Meneley had been storm-lost on his one voyage to the southern hold the previous term. Now Meneley's face brightened, and Siebel sat up straight, eyes wide with anticipation. We won't locate Pimer by whistling for him from the north. You two go south. Make certain that Trorik lets the old-timers know, if you can't carry the message discreetly to them yourselves, that Marin is dead and that his successor supports Bendon Weir. I believe that Master Oldive wants you to bring back some of those herbs and powders. He used up a large portion of his supplies on Marin. But don't you dare return until you've found Pimer. And that is the end of chapter 9.
Chapter 10.
There's a lot of comments.
Chapter 10. Chapter 10. Chapter 10.
Time is it?
Chapter 10.
It's
It's 9:09.
9, almost 9:10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It doesn't really matter. We've got plenty of days left.
We do have plenty of days left.
We're not, and we're not starting the book.
I know you
we're
want
not
to
starting
finish
the next
now.
book until at least Thursday.
I want
I'm-
it now.
Yeah. Come over here and say that.
What?
Okay. JJ, come on.
I want it now.
I
Alright.
want it now.
Alright, if you guys want, we can read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory sometime.
No.
I don't like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I'm not a big fan, honestly. either.
All right. Granny Bear says rest and save 10 and 11 for later. I agree. My eyes are still watering. I was doing some planting and I was moving a hanging tomato plant, which it has not died yet, onto somewhere else because we're getting ready to put our cattle panels up for our garden. And if you're interested, I'll post pictures, or Dad can post pictures to the website. But we've come a long way, and we're doing really good work as far as gardening. We're gonna have lots of tomatoes and peppers and peas and cucumbers and fun things. So, all right. Good night, everybody.
Yay!
It is too exciting. You guys want to come say goodnight to Granny Bear, who I believe is still watching?
Good night,
JJ,
Granny
go say
Bear.
goodnight to Granny Bear.
What is that little green?
Guten Tag.
Oh, sunflowers. Say goodnight.
Good night.
What's the sunflowers?
For the garden. Ooh.
Oh.
Night.
Night.